All right, we're live.
Whoa,
We're here.
Hunley, you snuck up on me on that one. I wasn't ready.
Uh-oh. He's getting last-minute notes coming in. All right, today's show, just to set expectations ahead of time and clarify, is about Oswald and his time in Japan.
What?
Nothing prior and nothing after.
No, it's not that strict. But Hunley's trying to be emphatic, and he's right. I mean, it's kind of about. No one's ever really covered this. There's a lot of dots, hence I'm wearing my dot tie today, which is emblematic of the show being a lot of dots today. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of dots, later this week there's a trial with involving dots. I think that was the first episode we ever said about dots.
Is that true?
Yeah, the episode 3 of the Rust lineup, Finding Dots.
Well, this one's got a lot of dots, but I it needs some historical setup because, and Eric's right. I mean, we do want to concentrate on Japan because this is my thinking behind this. The Oswald thing is so big that we need to bite it off in little chunks, and the little chunks are going to be thematic or geographic or historical or any way we can find to put out a show for a couple of hours about Oswald thematically. So this Oswald in Japan thing, while it is thematical, needs its own show because of the size of it. It is enormous just by itself. The Japanese thing is kind of big and has a lot of dots. And as Eric points out, it's going to take us over here. But how did we get here? This is going to involve Oswald graduating from Keesler, Air Force Base Keesler, in Mississippi, which I still think is operating, Eric. I don't know if you know if
Not sure.
Keesler Air Force Base, they'll know in the chat if it's still going on in Mississippi. But Oswald, how do we get to Japan? Let me just tell you how we're going to get to Japan, and then we'll digress. Oswald graduates 7th in his class in becoming an aviation electronics operator. And somehow this is his specialty. And he's able to do this better than anybody else. He's super smart. He's got obviously some language skills. He's, people have said he's an idiot and this and that. He's reading Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman as he's going over from San Diego on the Bexar. We'll get into that in a second. But I just wanted to let you know that he graduates from this academy, or whatever you want to call it, this Air Force School of Aviation, and he is sent with the best and the brightest to Japan. Now, why Japan? Japan is the front lines of where we are geographically and geopolitically at this time in 1957. It's right after the Korean War, Eric, and we are still launching sorties from this base in Atsugi because it is our closest base to the Korean conflict. And I just want to put that out there as to what the importance of Atsugi is. So let's talk about Atsugi historically, because I think people ought to know what this is all about. Atsugi was a Japanese air base. It was one of their top air bases, and it was where they trained their kamikazes at the end of the war. The Japanese Air Force was smart enough to dig and excavate these caves in Atsugi, and you'll see here as an example, this is not to be confused with the Hamas tunnels. These caves literally kept in there in certain proportions the Japanese Zeros that to avoid the bombing by U.S. bombers like Curtis LeMay from a previous episode. A lot of these episodes are connected in ways that people don't see when they're coming into them, but they are connected, people. So what the Japanese Air Force did was they put their planes and trained their pilots to become kamikazes in those caves. So when they surrendered in August or September 1945, they launched a coup d'etat against Hirohito, the emperor. And what that amounted to was the Japanese kamikaze pilots being led by an Air Force general out of Atsugi to continue to fly missions against the United States out of Atsugi. So the the emperor ordered the soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army to go to Atsugi, Eric, and literally remove the propellers from those planes in those caves. To stop them, because they just wouldn't stop attacking the U.S. and our men and trying to attack their own people to have a coup and get rid of the emperor. We discussed this, and I think in the Curtis LeMay episode. I think we discussed this in the Curtis LeMay episode. Just want to show you how these episodes are connected. MacArthur will now land. He will go in a wood burning propelled vehicle on top of a fire truck past 30,000 Japanese troops, unprotected, into Tokyo. He will get the signing on board the ship by the Japanese, and that will be officially the end of World War II. We will then land our planes at Atsugi and begin the long process of taking our wounded POWs who have been tortured unmercifully back to the United States, probably through Germany, and then eventually to the United States. And a lot of people have relatives who fought in that area. My father fought in that area, as did many of the viewers of this show have relatives. So Atsugi in the early 50s becomes a base for the Korean War. And we begin to launch, I think it was like the F-85 Sabre, the F-86, I think it was, Eric, out of Atsugi. We had the Super Constellation going out of Atsugi. It becomes an air base for us. Here's the look at how beautiful that thing is. Wow. It's just a beautiful plane. The F-86. I think that's the Sabre. Yeah, it is. But we had a line of them at the base. Now, this base is made up of the Navy, Marines, and the CIA. These are the three groups that are on this base. It becomes the northernmost. This is the Constellation. Yeah, this is the Air Force version. They had the Navy version there, which I don't know how different it is. It said U.S. Navy on the side. That's the Air Force one. The Navy ran this base. In fact, O&I ran this base, and O&I and CIA will be involved in a number of things in this episode that most people said, I didn't know that was going to be in the episode. But there are things in this episode that you're never going to know about. Nobody knows about. And that's why we do the show. So it comes to pass that the CIA will use this base. By the way, the base is completely surrounded by Japanese communists who have not surrendered. And the Russians, the Soviet Union, has supplied money. Keep in mind, this is the Cold War, Eric, and Japan is not fully settled yet. You know, Japan is like a no man's land. We're trying to democratize Japan, and the Soviets are pretty interested as to where it is, and the Chinese aren't happy either. So the Japanese Communist Party is extremely strong, and they have a lot of spies, and they're literally coming on the base at night, Eric, and you could probably relate to this. Not that they're communists, but they were coming on the base and stealing with 55-gallon drums airplane fuel and air fuel for their own black market, because there's also Koreans who have a village north of the base. The base is close to the town of Atsugi, hence the name of the base itself, just for people, for the historical record. But in 57, when he graduates from Keesler, he is sent there. And he first goes to San Diego, which is where he started out at Camp Pendleton, which I drove through the other day on the way back from San Diego. You could see tanks and all kinds of maneuvers, even from the 5 when you drive up past Camp Pendleton. It's kind of interesting. He goes back to Camp Pendleton, and he is sent on the USS Bexar, one of our cargo attack vessels, from San Diego to Japan, which takes a hell of a long time. There's a great photo. Yeah, that's the Bexar. There's a lot of ships in this episode. Oswald is on board an amazing amount of ships. And I understand he's a Marine and this and that, but holy cow, I had to look up all these different ships that he was on. It just doesn't end. But he goes over and he becomes what's known as a scope dope. And a scope dope is like a slang name for the radar technician who does this stuff. And the UPA-25 is that translucent board that you'll see in movies, Eric, where when you see it, they write backwards on it, and you could see the flight of planes. They're in a Quonset hut. Everybody understands what a Quonset hut is, right? So this is a bubble, a marine surveillance team that's in a Quonset hut, and they're called scope dopes. And in that hut, in this thing is called the bubble. The bubble that they're in is to track possible incoming Soviet or Chinese aircraft who may invade their airspace. So they're looking at it as a state of war all the time because of where they are geographically in Japan, you know, out there close to the Soviet Union, close to China. So the 1957, September 12th, is when he gets over there and begins to work this thing. And Oswald, despite what they say, he might have been dyslexic, but maybe that helps him write backwards on the translucent board. You know what I mean? Because he becomes one of the top guys on the base, and he's living on the base with a bunch of guys, and he gets along with these guys. Now, what's at this base? You got the CIA there. Okay, now what's the CIA doing? Apparently, the CIA is trying out their LSD experiments on soldiers. And people believe, and I'm one of them, was that Oswald was one of the soldiers that they tried it out on. And the reason for this, and people misinterpret this in many ways, many years, they're not trying to be cruel to these soldiers and military men, Eric. They're trying to find out and show them what it would be like to be given LSD by the Soviets. And here's why. And this is very important for anybody who's psychedelicized or who's not. When they dose these guys with LSD, it's to give them the experience of the feeling. And when we used it against German spies after the war, one of the things we did to fuck with them, to torture them, and to use it effectively was not as a truth serum, as many people said. It was to trick them into believing that this thing would never end. And the way to make it end was to give us the information we wanted. And the reason LSD was perfect for that was because it could last up to 12 hours. And if you're tripping and don't know how you got there, you've never felt it before, and you've been dosed secretly, and you're losing your mind seeing colors, images, and shapes, and it's going on for hours, you can easily be convinced that this is the way it's going to be. That's how this worked as a spy drug. Didn't work. I'm sorry, go on.
I was going to say, so it's really similar in basic training. We all had to, it's a terrible term, but we all had to go into the gas chamber. So we would go in and they would drop CS or tear gas.
Right.
And then we all had to take off our mask, make sure you get a good breath of it, and then get out of there. And the whole idea is so we all got exposure to the chemical and understood how it felt and things. So I'm thinking it might be similar.
It is similar because they told them that they were doing this. You know, when the ones who might have been intelligence operatives were told, and some of them were not. And we saw that with the guy with the Wormwood, the great Errol Morris documentary series about someone who jumps out of a hotel who was dosed unknown to him. So what they tried to do, they gathered up all the LSD they could get, and they brought it to Atsugi. Now, at the same time, back in New Orleans, a couple of years later, in the summer of 1963, there's an assistant district attorney who is questioned by Oswald, who comes in the door of the DA's office. This is in the summer of 63. I'm just jumping ahead. And the guy asks him about LSD. He later identifies this guy to be Oswald. And Oswald was asking him about the legality of LSD. Legally, is it allowed to be used? And the DA said, I think it is legal. And he sent him to their chemist who explained a little bit more to Oswald about the physical nature of LSD. But in Atsugi, there's an incident that I'm going to get into, which may be indicative of Oswald having been dosed. And that's when he goes over to the Philippines on one of these missions. But right now, he's working with these guys, and everybody seems to be getting along. They call him Ozzy Rabbit. He does an incredible Bugs Bunny impersonation. I think that's, I cover that in my script. It becomes his nickname. And he has such a good ear, and I don't mean that as a rabbit ear. He has such a good ear that he's able to hear on the headset a request for weather reports from a voice at 90,000 feet. And they all look at each other and they go, how can anybody be up at 90,000 feet? That's insane. And yet Oswald was able to discern that this was the pilot of the U-2 spy plane, which was on the grounds with them. The U-2 spy plane is right there, the Dragon Lady, the black version and the silver version. They had both of them. I don't know which photo you have, but the original one was silver. They later made a black one. That's the black one. That was shot by actually, I think, a 14-year-old Japanese boy who took that photo right at the base. Here's the silver one inside of a hangar here in L.A. This is years later, of course, but it's in mint condition. This was the famous U-2 spy plane, and what they called it was the CIA called it a utility plane, hence the U. But the officers who were in charge of that, they had guys with machine guns all around that hangar, right? And they were not worried about Oswald. They were worried about communist spies, and that's why the communist spies and look, you can't hide the plane. It was taken off. They were taking photos of it. The Soviets had trawlers in the Tokyo Bay with their own radar units tracking the thing. This is all of this stuff that, you know, we talk about Gary Powers. Gary Powers did not fly out of Atsugi, by the way. Gary Powers was grilled about Atsugi when he was shot down, but he had no connection to Atsugi and did not take off from there. The Soviets were obsessed with Atsugi, and the CIA knew that. And this was the tip of the spear, the Atsugi base of our Western military operation in that region. Atsugi was so top secret that you had to have a special clearance to get into it, which is why Oswald, having that special clearance, puts him in a secret position that most people don't even understand to this day. The CIA denying that they knew about him is, of course, preposterous, because to get into this base, this CIA base, you had to have a special clearance to get in there. There are guys at this base who will later talk about Oswald and say, you know, we all got along with him. We don't know what you're talking about. He was one of the best operators we had. And what happens with Oswald? So this situation begins to happen where he begins to, for the first time, and now keep in mind, he's 18, 19 years old, Eric. He's never been out. He's a virgin. He's never even gone to a bar. And they begin to take him out to this Bluebird bar, which is, here's a shot of him here. He's like 18 or 19 in that photo. I mean, there's one of him in 1958 in front of the barracks. I don't know if you have that one without a hat on, which is when he got there, originally got there. But they begin to, that one there, that's him in Atsugi in front of his barracks. Now, the barracks are just wooden shacks that were left over by the Koreans that built them, kind of a slave labor for the Japanese. But he's in there with these guys like Gator Daniels and George Wilkins and other guys I described in the Oswald AI movie version that we have on Locals. People, Zach Stout is with him, the Corporal Thomas Bagshaw is with him, and they all dig this guy. Now, inside the bubble, inside the hut, which is called the coffee mill, the coffee mill is their code name inside the Atsugi Quonset hut. It's 150 degrees in there. Why? Because they have all kinds of machines generating heat on top of the fact that they're in Japan and it's freaking humid as all hell anyway. So these guys are literally topless. Their shirts are off. I'm just trying to give people an image of what's going on here. They got headsets on. They got this translucent boards. It's hot as blazes in there, and they really bond together as a team, Eric. And they begin to become a group of men, a platoon that goes out together, drinks together, sleeps together, eats together, does all this stuff together, like you're well aware. So he begins to track this thing, and he hears race car to coffee mill, race car to coffee mill. Now, what's race car? Race car is the code word for the U-2. And it's transmitted to over the lines, and they begin to hear and track and see how high this thing goes. And they could see it take off. They could see that the thing takes off like straight up, and they get plotting it. It just goes straight up in the air, you know, and they've never seen a plane do this before, Eric. And when it lands, first of all, the pilots are taken to the cockpit in an ambulance, and they drive it at supersonic speed to the ambulance. The wheels fall off when it takes off. The thing is not completely perfect in terms of landing and taking off because it's still an experimental plane, Eric. Yet it's able to take off. It's able to land at the base. They roll it into the hangar. They have a couple of them there. In fact, when they go to the Philippines, they take one with them, which we're going to get up to in a couple minutes. But right now, these guys are all bonding, and they go to the Bluebird bar. Bluebird Bar is a place where these guys, these Marines, like each bar, and you're probably aware of this, each bar is separate for each group. Like the Bluebird is the Marine bar where the Marines go who are doing this type of work. That's their bar. So if they see someone who's a Navy guy, they just, say, get the F out of here, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But it's nothing really heavy. It's just bonding. The situation with them is that they drink together, and there's a guy in there in one of these episodes that he goes and drinks. There's a guy in there named Miguel or Michael Rodriguez. So Michael Rodriguez is a Mexican sergeant. He's a tech sergeant. He's a guy who is a technical sergeant. There's a shot of him. He's a gunnery sergeant. He's kind of a bulldog of a guy. He looks like a sergeant out of a movie. And he's in the Bluebird one night, and he's with another non-commissioned officer, another sergeant, and he's got his girlfriend with him. And Oswald goes over to him and pours a drink on him. And the guy gets up, and a fight almost breaks out. And Oswald is calling him out, saying, "Let's go outside. I'll kick your ass." And the guy says, "I'm not going to lose my rank over fighting some private, over him spilling a drink on me." So Rodriguez calls the MPs, and they take Oswald away. And Oswald, this is one of two charges against him where he's going to have to stand trial to be court-martialed, Eric. This is not the first one. I'm going to get into a second one, but I just wanted to point out the Bluebird. Now, the Bluebird is one bar he goes to, and that's a regular divey kind of place. But there's another place called the Queen Bee. Now, the Queen Bee is in Tokyo, and it is a super luxurious, high-end, Japanese-style burlesque nightclub that cost a fortune to get in, and it's mostly American officers who are in there and elite Japanese. Here's a shot. This might be years later, but it's still the Queen Bee. It might be in the 60s.
It's 56, supposedly.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. I was thinking.
So very close.
Okay. So this club, this is like the Copacabana, of Tokyo. So if you could see these girls, these are like bottle girls. These are girls who, they had over 100 hostesses who would rotate in and out of there. This place is huge. Super expensive. You had to buy the champagne for the girls, blah, blah, blah. A lot of the American GIs had housekeeping setups where they had an apartment in Tokyo they paid for, and they put a girl in there. And when they got their 2 days off, they would go into Tokyo and be with these girls. Oswald had that set up. Oswald meets a girl in there named Oyoshi, and I described the situation in my script. I think in part 1 that Eric did the AI on. One of the girls in there and him hit it off, and she begins grilling him about the black lady or the dragon lady, which is the U2. And Oswald believes that she's a communist spy, and he's advised to keep it going. They contact him. If you see that O&I team that I sent you a picture of, there's a team of just O&I people who were at Atsugi. I think there's a shot of them. Keep in mind, this is at the base. This is just the O&I staff of intelligence operatives who were there. That's how important this is. So these guys talk to Oswald, and they tell him to keep it going. They want to see if she's got information to offer to Oswald in terms of what the communists know or don't know, the Japanese communists, of which they felt that she was one of. So he continues to go out with her. He may have lost his virginity with her. I'm not really sure. But he is seen with this girl so many times that the men begin to wonder, how is this private with this hostess from the Queen Bee? It doesn't make any economic sense. And yet that's what's going on. The other officers in the club, they really are. I mean, think about going to a place, some high-end club where there's generals or lieutenants, and you see this private in there with this smoking hot Japanese chick. I mean,
that's not normal.
Right. But this is what's going on. I mean, so he continues to date her. Anyway, make a long story short, they're told they're going to have to ship out to the Philippines. Okay. And why they're going to have to ship out to the Philippines? It's part of a thing called Operation Strongback. And I'll get into that in a second. This is them waiting for their ship to go to the Philippines. And I think that's they're waiting for the USS Terrell County, which is another ship that he goes on board. These are his men. Now, this is the MAX unit. So they're going as an Air Force radar unit from Atsugi to the Philippines. Now, why are they going to the Philippines? Okay, there's a guy named Sukarno in Indonesia, and we are thinking of toppling Sukarno, who is not cooperating with us. And we're going to go to the Philippines and operate a coup d'etat from the Philippines. And all of the Marines are now starting to assemble in the Philippines and Corregidor to begin an assault on Indonesia to get rid of Sukarno. This Sukarno will last probably until 1968. If I remember my history, he'll be replaced by Suharto, who does cooperate with us. But Sukarno is a nationalist and independent thinker. By the way, I think Sukarno had 13 wives, 12 or 13 wives. Could be a record for a dictator in my book, if I remember my history correct about Sukarno. He will be uncooperative with the CIA, let's just put it that way, and begin to lean into the Soviet sphere or the Chinese sphere or one of these spheres that we're not happy with. So we send over this Marine group, and they begin to land in the Philippines, and they end up in Corregidor. And is that the is it
Terrell County?
That's the Terrell County. Okay, yeah. So they're on board this ship now. In a C-130 transport or a Super Constellation, whatever they had at that time, they disassemble the U-2 and they take it with them. They take the plane with them. That's why these guys are there, because they're going to help with the radar, not only of incoming, they're worried about incoming Soviet planes or incoming Chinese planes or Korean. They also are going to launch the U-2 again to do aerial reconnaissance, and they take it with them and they assemble it in the Philippines, and they set up a base with the radar equipment. And as they're waiting at the base, there's a helicopter that comes out of the sky. And who's in the helicopter? It's John Wayne, of course. So John Wayne shows up to make a movie, having nothing to do with his story. He shows up to make a movie, The Barbarian and the Geisha. The Barbarian and the Geisha is set in like 1858. This is not a war picture. This is a picture. Yeah, if you look at this, is a crazy, crazy movie directed by John Huston. It was a big budget movie for the studio, set in 1858, when the President of the United States, I forget who it was in 1858, sends this guy true story, who John Wayne is playing, to be the first ambassador of Japan. And the Emperor of Japan denies him access to Japan and gives him a cabin in the woods to live in. And he begins to fall in love with Japanese culture, and it's based on a book and real history. Anyway, John Wayne shows up. Now, Oswald, because of his incident with this guy who he spilled a drink on, was sent to the brig, and he was given a reprieve on his sentence in the brig because they were going to the Philippines, right? So he has now been given, and you can relate to this, Hunley, mess duty. He's the mess guy. And this is the picture. I'll explain this in a second. Oswald begins to be the mess guy. He's the cook for everyone now. As I guess it rotates, but he embraces it. He starts cooking like 180 egg omelets at the same time. He gets into this, and before he goes to the Philippines, he decides he doesn't want to go to the Philippines. And this is really interesting. Now, if you remember the story when he's in Moscow, how he slits his wrist when the Soviets are telling him he's got to leave Moscow. In this particular case, he takes out in his locker, he takes out a 2-shot Derringer that he has, and he shoots himself right here in the arm with the Derringer. And it goes through his arm and comes out the other side. And he says, I think I just shot myself. And the men come over and they go, what happened? And he said, the gun went off. I swear, you can't make this up. The gun went off. I think I shot myself. And they look at him like, where did you get this gun? This is an unauthorized weapon. He said, it's a 2-shot Derringer that I bought in Tokyo one night. And they go, oh, dude, you're dead. You're dead. Then they're just gone. They're going to kill you for this. in a military way, they're saying you're not going to get away with this. So he's got to go to the hospital on the base. They got to file a report, and of course, he's charged with having an unauthorized weapon. Eric, if you could explain to the audience what that means in military terms.
Well, it'd be 2 charges: unauthorized weapon and possibly, ironically, damage to government property.
Yes, and that's not the exact wording of it, but it was the unauthorized weapon and the discharge of an unauthorized weapon he was charged with. And now this is his second court-martial, but he's yet to stand trial. So they waived this shit so he could go to the Philippines. Now he goes to the Philippines because they're trying to, in Operation Strongback, which is, if people are going to have to watch this episode twice, Operation Strongback is our CIA attempt to topple Sukarno. And it's all hands on deck. So he's got to go, and he's got to be the mess chef. So he's cooking lunch for John Wayne. You can't make this up. John Wayne is now, if you put that photo back up, you'll see this rare photo that we found of John Wayne eating with the men in the mess hall. And
just to explain the photo, everybody's like, it's a bad photo. I think they're shooting through a screen. If you look, this is like a fly screen or something of that sort. And that's why you have all the lines going across. It's nearly impossible to sharpen it up too much more. But you can see Oswald in the back.
You'll
right
see
in the doorway.
There's Lee Harvey Oswald in the back there. That's the kitchen entrance. And this is the mess hall itself. This is in Corregidor.
Might even be a tent.
Well, that I don't know. Yeah, that I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. But they did have buildings there. They did have structure there. And we did have a base. So it wasn't that bizarre. This is when he was shipped out to Manila, and they do end up Manila, by the way, and Atsugi are the 2 places that the CIA has the most LSD. Interestingly enough, they put their LSD in Manila, and they put the rest of it in Atsugi. As bizarre as that sounds, but the CIA LSD experiments in Atsugi were called Operation Derby Hat. And it's a very rare secret operation that even I never heard of until a couple of years ago. Operation Derby Hat is just their Far East version of their MK Ultra. And this is, I think, designed for their own intelligence operatives to learn what it feels like. And I think, Gottlieb and these other guys explained it, like I said, that you must understand how it feels in case you're given it and captured. Yeah, no, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I didn't understand that.
So you recognize, oh my God, I feel weird. Oh, I felt this before. I know.
Right, I'm tripping. And I think that DEA in another level did that with marijuana. So when they infiltrated undercover, they could smoke weed with dealers and know how it feels to be stoned. I think the DEA guys do that too. So they could, I'm not a DEA guy, but I was on the other side. But I think that's what I saw in a bunch of movies. But anyway, so he's over there with John Wayne. Now, John Wayne is doing this picture of the barbarian and the geisha, but he's running around now enjoying the girls, John Wayne, and he's with the men and he drinks with the men. And I was surprised just how interactive John Wayne was with these soldiers.
Oh, famously. No,
I didn't know
he
that.
loves soldiers.
He got right off the helicopter. Next thing you know, he's drinking with all of them, taking photos.
I think my dad even met him way back in the day, but he famously liked hanging out with, quote, working men, with soldiers. And I think it's partly because I think he got an exclusion for, like heel spurs or something like that.
Yeah.
Or being flat-footed.
Well,
so there might have been a little guilt that he wasn't able to serve.
No, but there is the whatchamacall when they go and entertain the troops.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, a lot of guys got that, But anyway, so he's over there and he's got mess duty and he's not happy about it. And the next thing you know, he is relieved of duty and he's flown back on his own on a military plane, Oswald, to another base down 400 miles south of Tokyo. And USO. Thank you, Russell. Yeah, sometimes I forget. There's so many letters, you forget.
It slipped my mind as soon as you said
I know.
it. So I was waiting for the chat.
Right. Yeah. So there's a guy. He's shipped to another base, 400 miles south of Tokyo, and they tell the men, they're going, what happened to Oswald? And they said medical problems, and the guy goes, what? And he's flown back, and people believe that the medical, if you look at the history of intelligence, they will use a medical cover for a lot of reasons to as an excuse to take a guy out of the line of duty and do stuff with him. Now, they claim that he was bleeding rectally from behind from hemorrhoids and that he had gonorrhea from these Japanese girls, which may or may not be true. The gonorrhea was so light, and most of the men had a type of urethritis or a low STD that it was accepted back then, didn't kill you. And the hemorrhoids were hemorrhoids. I mean, but he was shipped back to another base, and on that other base were his friends, some of his friends from Keesler Air Force Base who knew him. And one of them was this guy, I don't know if you have a picture of him, Owen Dejanovic. Now, Owen Dejanovic was graduated from the Air Force base with him from Mississippi, and he's also an air radar guy. Owen Dejanovic is in this other base, which is kind of interesting. And he looks at Oswald and he says, I haven't seen you since, back in the day. And he says, yeah, I've been doing this, doing that. And the interesting thing about this guy is that he really is close to Oswald. Dejanovic will later become an NFL star for the Houston Oilers. There's a reason I'm mentioning him. And he will testify that Oswald was, a normal guy and one of his close friends, but not called. None of these people are called before the Warren Commission, by the way. They're all just people that interfaced with Oswald, and the Warren Commission never thought any of these people would be interested. Now, there's a reason for it. You remember those caves that we showed earlier on?
Yeah.
Those caves in Atsugi will be replaced by the U.S. military and filled with tactical nuclear weapons, including, I believe, the Davy Crockett and others. This was in violation of our treaty with the Japanese. And that was one of the, here he is. Yeah, there he is. He ends up playing for the Houston Oilers and also a Canadian league at one point, like in the mid 60s. But just an interesting another dot to connect Oswald to other interesting people like Mac Wallace being the football star of his high school. There's a lot of interesting people involved with this stuff. But this guy, anyway, he's another guy who's in the MAC unit down there. So Oswald has yet to stand trial for these things, Eric, for these charges. And there's a guy, he goes to see a guy. This is really interesting. He goes to get a lawyer, and he kind of did this when he got arrested. He wanted the head of the ACLU to defend him. If you remember, they called up trying to find this guy in New York who was the head of the American Civil Liberties Union. He goes into Tokyo, and there's a guy named Franklin Warren. Now, Franklin Warren would be the equivalent of Alan Dershowitz of Tokyo. He defended Tojo in the war crimes trials. That's how big this guy is. Franklin Warren defended Japanese war criminals and got them off. And he is revered in Tokyo for being the most honest, legal American they've ever seen. He literally defended their barbaric war criminals, and nobody would do it except this guy. And Oswald goes to see this guy, Franklin Warren, for a 2-bit court-martial gun thing. And so Warren says, look, not for nothing, but I'm a little bit busy right now, with my stuff as the biggest attorney in Tokyo. Kind of interesting. I don't know what he was getting at with that, but the guy turns him down, and Oswald has to defend himself. So Oswald becomes his own lawyer in these cases. And of course he loses, because these are, if you read the transcripts, the guy shows up, Rodriguez shows up, the guy he was with shows up at the trial. And then with the gun thing was an open and shut case. So he's got 2 court-martial trials rolled into one. They find him on the gun charge, and then they find him guilty. He was drunk they believe that he was drunk, but it doesn't matter because he was speaking profanely to an officer. I don't know if a sergeant's an officer. Whatever a sergeant is, it's a rank above him. Mm-hmm. So
it's a non-commissioned officer.
Non-commissioned officer. So he's an officer of some sort. Anyway, so it's he loses both cases. That's the point of the thing. Sentenced to 28 days in the brig, and I mean hard time. He has to literally go up to a line, a yellow line, and yell repeatedly, "I have to go to the bathroom." You got to stand rigidly. I mean, it's just really rough. I mean, a guy who was in another cell next to him described to investigators what it was like in that brig. It was not pleasant. Let me put it that way. When he came out, he was kind of shell-shocked, having been in there for a number of weeks, for over a month in the summer, almost 2 months in July and August. And at this point, he came out, with a whole different attitude. But some people believe, and I'm one of them, this is where, when he was in the brig, this is when he was approached by O&I, when they got him alone separately. And this is where, I'm not alone in this, but I do believe that's where the intelligence people laid out this plan to him, because this is going to be the beginning of his intelligence life. And I think, not that they had threatened him with anything more, I just believe that they singled him out in the brig as a guy who could do this type of work. And I think that's where it finally first started. And that's why Japan is important. That's why Atsugi is important. I think that they did LSD experiments on him with his consent or not consent, so he could know how it feels. And he began to get training as an intelligence operative at Atsugi, which is not bizarre since there was so much going on there.
Yeah, he could have been a snitch too.
I know. I don't know. I don't know. He could have been a Soviet agent at that point.
But he seems to be somebody who can put more than a couple words together.
Yeah, I don't think. I don't think there was any doubt about that. I mean, you just look at the reading list of books. He begins to study after this brig. He begins to study Russian language albums that they give him. They begin to give him training for the Russian language. He's seen with a Eurasian hot smoking girl in this, outside of this base, 400 miles south of Tokyo. He's got a Russian girlfriend now. And I don't know if he's doing this for them or they're doing this to him. But somebody's doing something to somebody. There's also a guy there named John Rene Heindel. And he becomes a close friend of John Rene Heindel. Heindel's nickname is Hidel. And he's never called before the Warren Commission. And that's where Hidel gets where Oswald gets the name Hidel. It's from his friend who served with him in Atsugi. And Heindel said his own nickname was Hidel, Hiddell. And that's where Oswald got it from. So, but he was surprised he was never called before the Warren Commission. Now, when the shooting happens in Dallas, the 112th Military Group, which is Colonel Robert Jones, says that we have a file on A.J. Hidell, and we also have a file on Lee Harvey Oswald. They were not the same person. They're two different people. And the Hidell that they had the file on was this other guy, John Rene Heindel. Why? I don't know. But what Jones says later says they had two files. They had one on Oswald, one on Heindel, and they were not the same. So that was kind of interesting. But when Oswald comes back, he's eventually, he asked for the discharge because of his mother having had candy fall on her head in the candy store. And he puts in for this discharge, and eventually the MPs show up and they said, your discharge went through. And that will bring him back to the United States, where he will quickly, within a month, get on a ship from New Orleans, the Marion Lakes, and go to northern France, to Le Havre, France. From there, he will fly in a military hop, in a military plane, to Helsinki, Finland, where he will stay in 2 luxury hotels and then go from there to Moscow. Everything happens very quickly after the brig, is what I'm getting at. After they indoctrinate him and meet with him, supposedly, in this brig, and he gets out, everything happens at lightning speed.
How long was he actually stationed there in this whole sequence?
He's in the brig in June 1958. He goes to the Philippines November 20th, 1957. From November 57 to 58 is the operation, September 14th to October 6th, He gets sent to northern Taiwan, which is another separate mission. They take another ship to go to northern Taiwan. This is really interesting. September 14th to October 6th, 1958. He takes his unit to Pingtang, northern Taiwan, because the Chinese communists have fired some missiles into Formosa. Does that sound contemporary, Eric?
I'm not sure. Well, yeah. But I'm not saying this is a lot of movement in a pretty short period of time. I mean, it sounded like he was only stationed there for about 2 years.
Yes, that is true. That is true. And it's a lot of movement. He gets there in 57, and 57 is September 12th, 1957. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. But he would go into Tokyo every time he got a 2-day pass. And these guys were wondering, what's he doing in Tokyo? And he came back and he said, I've infiltrated Japanese communists. Like he tells this guy, one of his close friends, he tells Zach Stout that I've infiltrated a communist group. I mean, he doesn't talk about it much, but he at least told him that.
And that was his first exposure to ONI, though, right? Is when he said, he kind of reported to them that there was something going on, or communists, before he was locked up.
Yes,
or any of that.
ONI came to him and talked to him about the Japanese girl he was dating. And not that it wasn't even illegal to date the Japanese girls, by the way. I think it was, everybody did it. It might have been technically illegal, but everybody did it. So I think it cut both ways. Now, keep in mind, when Gary Powers is shot down, 1960, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, Atsugi CIA rolls up the entire base, takes their U-2s, and gets the hell out of there because of the Soviets taking down Gary Powers. Now, you wonder, Gary Powers later said that he believed that Oswald gave up the height and numbers of the plane, and that was Powers saying that years later. What he gave up to the Soviets is still debated to this day, if anything. The Soviets claim that the way they shot down Powers was not by knowing that he could go to 90,000 feet. Their missiles, their surface-to-air missiles, could not reach the U-2s. So what the Soviets did was they shot them up in a cluster, Eric. There's Powers right there. They shot them up in a cluster and detonated them as a cluster of surface-to-air missiles, forming a blast that knocked the wing off the U-2. And that was how they shot down the U-2. This is what they did from the ground, because a lot of people believed, or it was leaked out, that the Soviets got this information on the levels that the U-2 could climb to 90,000 feet. He wouldn't give up that information, Powers. Powers would not reveal the elevation he was shot down at. He didn't want the Soviets to have that information. And he claimed later he was not at the 90,000 feet maximum level. He was at 68,000 or 70,000 feet. And yet the surface-to-air missiles didn't hit him. It was just a cluster blast underneath that did the damage to the plane, which is kind of brilliant if you think about it. I mean, there were 28 U-2 flights prior to Oswald's defection in October 1959. The next flight took off April 19th, 1960, and it was fine. The second flight after his defection was Gary Powers. Yeah, I know. I mean,
it's possible.
Yes, look, people have debated this for decades, absolutely for decades. But the Soviets, they must have thought, why is this guy giving us this gift? What's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. And why wouldn't they let him do it? I mean, if it was a false defection, but they could have.
You have to offer something. You have to offer something. Is it possible that Gary Powers was a sacrificial lamb?
It is.
I know. I mean, it's not that crazy. I mean, you got to give them something of value to them to believe that Oswald is a legitimate defector. Now, it was claimed by his superior officer that they had to change. This is Gajewski. They had to change all of the codes, every single thing, going all the way back to El Toro, all the way back to California, because Oswald knew every single code, every single call sign, every single stuff that that we had in any base, and they had to change them all. And this cost a lot of money and cost thousands of man hours, according to some of the men who supervised him, if indeed he did do that, you know.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of meat on this bone. There's a lot of dots. I don't know how they all connect on what his part was in all of this, but holy crap, Eric. I mean, Oswald walked around the base with a camera taking pictures of everything. These pictures will later be found on his Minox in Dallas in his sea bag with these photos from Atsugi. And
that Minox, for comparison's sake, is would be the equivalent of like a $5,000 high-end Sony Alpha camera for one of us to have.
Yeah, I mean, they claim that he had $208 in his account when he left New Orleans to go on the ship to France. Well, $208 would be the equivalent of $2,200 in your bank account today. So it's not that small of an amount in terms of buying things and getting to foreign places.
Well, also, he was a private. And if I recall, my dad was a Marine private in the late 50s, early 60s, and his salary is like $60 a month.
Right. He got docked to $60 a month or $50 a month, which is what it was. He got docked that because of the court-martialing. It was docked $25 a month in the first court-martial, and then I think they took the rest away over a period of time. It was just for a few months. They didn't completely take his money away. But did you see the movie poster of the John Wayne movie? I don't know if you got a kick out of that. There was a poster of the geisha and the barbarian that I kind of liked. And there's I don't know if you got to see that. It doesn't matter. But anyway, so he will go back quickly. This is a shot of John Wayne. This is the original movie poster, which I got a kick out of because it doesn't look like John Wayne, but he was being directed by a guy. Sam Jaffe's in the picture also, but he's being directed by John Huston, and he punched John Huston in the face and knocked him out at one point during the filming of the movie. A total alcoholic, John Huston, as everybody in Hollywood later would realize. Yeah, there it is. That's just so wonderful.
Was that when he did The Quiet Man too? When he was trying to branch away from the westerns or whatever?
He did another war picture, the Something of Eagles, the next year, which is another Pacific war picture. I mean, there was a bunch of these South Pacific war pictures that he did at that time, but then later would go back to doing cowboy pictures. But anyway, I just thought it was ironic that he would run into Oswald there as another strange dot. The commanding officer was a guy named John Donovan, and he's not related to the Donovan that we did the episode about, but he would testify before the Warren Commission, Donovan, and he would be grilled after the assassination of what his take was on Oswald. And a couple of these guys were deep state operatives, and I think Donovan was one of them, because he kind of throws Oswald under the bus, and it doesn't match up with anybody. Nelson Delgado was another one. I think they got to two guys, like a commanding officer and a guy in a platoon, and the rest of the guys in the platoon disagreed with these two guys privately, saying, we don't know who they're talking about. That's not the Oswald we knew. So apparently these two guys were gotten to and gave very bad reviews of Oswald as a person that nobody recognized. You know, the fact that he was yelling about communism as a better system and all this stuff, it boggles the mind that anybody would be listening to this and not report him. You know, I mean, this is a guy who's obviously been court-martialed twice, and he's supposedly yelling how great communism is and speaking Russian, but nobody finds this to be bizarre, you know.
Yeah, not only that, after he leaves the Soviet Union, he comes right back as a nice job with a clearance. You definitely give that clearance to defectors, you know, because hey,
we're going to get to that in another episode, but this one was just about Japan. There's a little bit about the Philippines, a little bit about Formosa, which is Taiwan, and this backstory about Operation Strongback. But basically, we wanted to show you that in June of 1958, Oswald was in the Marines brig in Atsugi, Japan, and was visited by two men in suits was the description that I got of Oswald, and I think that's where it starts, and that's always been my opinion.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean, think it might have started even before that, though.
Possibly. Right, no, but I'm saying he plays spy as a kid. He wants to be a spy. I mean, and all the stuff that successful spies do, they start somewhere, and this is where he started with his friends, watching I Led 3 Lives. I was a communist for the FBI. I mean, all of that stuff, that groundwork is laid as a kid. So it's not unusual. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It literally is stuff that he wants to do when he grows up. And he's not even grown up yet. He's 18, Eric. He's 18,
I meant his first exposure could have been when he was dealing with his girlfriend at the time with O&I, and his time in the brig.
Yeah.
And even the court martial, some of that could have been a cover story.
I think it is
put in there to be a snitch in the prison to see if another, find other communists.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, the gunshot is bizarre. The gunshot mimics what he does in Moscow a couple of months later, where he slashes his wrist and gets into the bathtub to bleed out. And he's found by Rima, the Soviet tour guide. They break the door down. We'll get into that when we do Oswald in Moscow. We're going to break it up into little sections geographically. Like I said, we'll do an Oswald in Moscow piece. But he will eventually mimic what he did with the Derringer. By shooting himself in the arm. He cuts his wrists later, and this seems to work with the Soviets who allow him to stay in Moscow for the time being until he's interviewed by Priscilla McMillan, who mysteriously shows up, the CIA operative who was in the episode on Ruth Paine, based on the movie by our friend Max Good. Yeah. So a lot of these things, a lot of these dots are interconnected. So but the Atsugi base, it's just one of those things that was run by the CIA and eventually rolled up by the CIA years later to get out of there. But up until the end of the war, now keep in mind, 45, the CIA doesn't even exist. They come in 49, 1951, 1952. The base puts in a movie theater. They put in a bowling alley. The wives show up. Hey, we got a whole thing going on here. Everybody's Americanized. They put in Coca-Cola machines in 1952. It becomes an American base is kind of what I'm getting at. But the tactical nukes in those caves was something that we never admitted to the Japanese. It's the same thing that we found with a General Edwin Walker in Berlin with his Davy Crockett stash at his base in Germany.
Well, it would have been extremely strategic, especially with Korea. I mean,
look
at right now, you have North Korea always testing over the Japan Sea. So I mean, it's right there. Yeah,
and anyway, that was a perfect hideout for our nukes. Was in those caves, which went down multiple levels, by the way.
Wow, perfect. All right, so we have some super chats that came in here.
Okay.
Jelmer Solinger, what would it take to stop the ongoing rampage of the Alan Dulles-like people who are intelligent and have no limits in achieving their evil plans?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if you have no CIA and everybody else does, now what do you do, bro? I mean, or ma'am, the situation is you have to have somebody. I mean, you need an intelligence unit. You need oversight is the problem. The real problem is oversight. Congressional people doing their duty, but they use programs like prison to get the dirt on every single congressman, thereby eliminating oversight. I mean, it's definitely a problem.
And who's watching the watchers?
Who's watching the watchers? I mean, it's really tricky stuff, but you maybe rotating them out of there with term limits, 2 years at a time, you got to go. I mean, it's the only thing I could think of in terms of CIA directorship. Do not let them get entrenched. Get rid of the director of the FBI every 2 years. Got to go. Sorry. Nice to know you. Can't be do whatever you want, but you can't come here. Same thing with CIA. Same thing with NSA. I think you got to rotate them out. Get them out of there.
Problem is, I don't really think it's even the directors. It's those deputy directors that are very senior.
Oh, get them out of there too.
Worked every mission.
All right, then you got to go. You got to go. Got to rotate them out.
Forrest Grump. I like that name. Thanks for all you guys do to bring us the truth. Thank you. Kim Upperman. Oswald may come up and shake your hand on the other side for telling the truth about who he really was. Love you guys.
Wouldn't that be
Thank
great?
you,
You get to the other side and there's Oswald as soon as you get there.
You're like, you're the first person.
Yeah, you're the first person. I thought there'd be others.
Thank you, Dick. Bob Tranquilli, late to the game. Thank you, Bob. I love seeing these members for multiple months. It's nice having that ongoing support. Bob Tranquilli, greetings from beautiful Chilliwack,
That's funny.
BC, Soviet Kazakhstan.
Man, that happened so fast. I mean, but these communists don't go away.
No.
They do not quit. You know, remember the phrase "red diaper babies"?
True.
The
That's
children of the children. Yeah. What is it?
Any of the guys he was in service with still alive?
That
Possibly. I mean, but
that
you know, I mean, Oswald would be what,
I mean,
in his upper 80s right now?
No, but there's plenty of interviews that they gave. If you dig deep enough, you'll find the information that I'm talking about. You know, with this guy Gajewski and Zach Stout and Gator Daniels, George Wilkins. There's interviews out there, whether they're alive or not. They're on the record talking about it, so it's just as good.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Some of them are recorded too and filmed.
Yeah.
Helmer, Helmer, I forgot his name.
Rosenberg.
I don't know if it's Rosenberg, but there's a YouTube channel of this guy, Helmer, and he's collected nothing but old films of interviews, things like that with JFK here on YouTube. I've actually used some of it. He was kind enough to say, yeah, go ahead when I asked. But I recommend everybody check that out. He has a lot of Mark Lane interviews, a lot of, just interview after interview after interview. Definitely check that out. Now, something you might want to check out is we do have a meetup coming up.
Oh my God, look at that.
Yeah, look at that.
Who's the guy on the extreme left? The guy in the Uncle Sam costume? That's a real Uncle Sam, or?
Yeah, that's from the Wax Museum in Orlando.
Okay, that's weird.
And then we borrowed you from another shot.
That's another some other operation there. Wow.
Yep. So Uncle Sam and us would like to see you in Youngstown.
That's funny.
And you should join us where we can conspire, talk about everything going wrong with the country. The main event is the 17th of March. It will be a live show as well as a hangout. You think
there'll be a primary, Eric, at that time? Because the Ohio primary, I think, is March 19th.
It should be. I mean, Nikki Haley's probably never going to drop out.
Right.
She's already said that. So, but I believe it's not only the primary. I think it's also their election.
Yes.
For a congressperson. And
same thing here in LA, March 5th. We have the same situation here. So we will be able to influence that a little bit, I hope, by being in there at that time.
That's the idea.
Okay. All right.
That's the idea. We're hoping to try to coordinate some appearances, but we'll see how that all goes.
Well, I think it's a good time to be there because it's the Ides of March. It's St. Patty's Day. It's a town we wanted to visit because of the
Trafficant,
the James Trafficant episode.
Right next to East Palestine. It's like not that far down the road.
Close to Pittsburgh and close to Cleveland. I mean, I'm going to fly to Cleveland of all places and go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I always wanted to do, but I've never been in Cleveland, so I'm taking advantage of this to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. Not to be confused with the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio.
Right.
I'm not going to go to the NFL Hall of Fame.
I think this is right. I think it is Helmer Reinberg. I think that's it. That has a bunch of JFK interviews and footage and things from the time. But anyway, there are links in the descriptions wherever you're watching this.
Yeah, how do they get there? They buy the tickets online or something? Or what?
Yep, you can buy the tickets online. We even have a deal at the hotel. If anybody has questions, I got a block of rooms that I've reserved in a hotel because the rooms are selling out fast.
Okay,
extremely fast. So we got a few rooms there. If anybody wants to reach out and contact.
Oh, that'll be fun.
And
does the hotel have a bar?
I'm not sure. There's multiple hotels. People have to kind of spread it out, through the area.
Right.
But this place is over a bar.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Right on.
This is a federal. Trivia note: the place we are actually going to be is on the third floor of a building that was visited by Bar Rescue.
What is Bar Rescue is what? Is that
The TV show
that renovates bars or something?
Yeah, it's a TV show that's kind of based on Gordon Ramsay's, how he went into restaurants that were failing or having problems, kitchen nightmares, and then nightmares. There's a variant of it called Bar Rescue that was on Spike TV, and the restaurant on the bottom is technically one of their success stories.
Oh, weird.
It's called the Federal.
Oh, that's the name of the bar. Gotcha. Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah, it's like a bar and hamburger place, etc.
Okay, so we can eat and conspire there, you're saying?
Well, we could do that in addition to upstairs where we have food coming in.
Right.
And we will definitely be conspiring.
Well, these people are going to get food for their money, and they're going to get entertainment and the whole event.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's something I would do. All right. This sounds interesting.
I think so. I think it'll be a pretty good time. Right. And if things work out right, it'll almost be 2 shows. So we have the political oriented show, take an intermission, and then do the Watergate themed hour or so.
Well, I just wanted to plug this book, which is what I got through the JFK Book Fund. This is called The Missing Chapter, Lee Harvey Oswald in the Far East.
Is that one by Jack something?
Jack Swikey.
Swikey, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is a kind of a very interesting book. Thank you to the people who gave donations through PayPal and Cash App and everything else, because I would never have known about this book. And it's got all kinds of great documents in here and letters to him that he's found over the years. Just an incredible. He was part of the military.
Yeah, he was stationed there.
He was stationed there. That's what I was trying to say. And this is one of the books. But I mean, this is mentioned in a bunch of other books too. I mean, it's in Crossfire, the Jim Marrs book, and it's in a bunch of different books. So it's not an obscure thing about Japan. How you interpret Japan is up to you. I've heard it interpreted in many different ways. There's also, Case Nagel, who was there, and Russell talks about him, and there's a bunch of different guys. Gary Hemming was supposedly there. There's a lot of misinformation about guys who served with Oswald in Atsugi. You have to take it with a grain of salt, because people did rotate through there, and they may not have even met Oswald, at that base.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Even those stationed at the base might not have.
I know, because
it depends on the population.
Right. He's in this tiny unit in a Quonset hut all day. I mean, it's not like he was intermingling with these other guys. They had a very tight little platoon of scope dopes, as they called them.
Reminds me actually of drone people of modern day, because they have like their own little area. They can't bring anything in, and they fly drone missions inside of there. They don't necessarily interact with a lot of other people on the base. So probably a similar type of scenario.
Well, he'd be perfect bait for the Soviets if they wanted to dangle him. There's a guy who, is someone that may be of interest to the Soviets. You got to have some sort of interest for the dangle to work.
Oh, for sure.
Or maybe he decided to go red. I don't know. Maybe,
but he just seemed to have an easy time going red and unread, and
Well, it doesn't make sense.
It really does not make sense.
Why would you let the guy just come back in without being grilled and give him another one of these jobs at Childers, the map making, military map making facility inside of Dallas? It doesn't make any sense.
And he also had a lot of mobility for private, for God's sake. I mean,
I know. That is weird. Come on. That is weird.
I've been everybody go look really quickly and just see how well a specialist, that's an E4. He's like an E1 too. How they all are declaring bankruptcy left and right because they can't afford to feed their families. I mean, these are not rich.
Well, he was being promoted to corporal, and he lost the stripe because of
the E4. Yeah.
Yeah, he lost that stripe because of the court-martialing. I mean, first of all, he spills a drink on a sergeant. You just go, all right, that's insane. Like, why would you go up to a sergeant and dump a drink on him? Yelling, "The South will rise again," and all kinds of stuff that's completely out of character for him. who never really drank and didn't really do this stuff. You dump it on the sergeant, and then just to shooting yourself in the arm. He had the infirmary to help him wrote that he by accident shot himself with his 45 Army with his automatic with the Army gun, and they said, well, it's not a 45 entrance wound, it's a 22. And they went,
big difference.
Right. So the infirmary was trying to help him to no avail. They saw through this in the court-martial court case where he defends himself like he's F. Lee Bailey. I mean, holy cow.
Wow, that's crazy.
A lot of dots, my friend. A lot of dots.
Let's see. Rick Borth, I am 69 years old, 3 times the age as Oswald. He did more in 23 years than I've done in 69 years.
You know, I've said this. I've said the same thing repeatedly. This guy did, by the age of 24, he was 60 years old in terms of cat life. I mean, he did so much stuff packed in there that, you know, this is the kind of guy who would have risen through the ranks of our intelligence service.
Maybe a CIA director, possibly.
By now, right? Because keep in mind, Dulles made his bones in Switzerland during World War II. You got to do something somewhere when you're younger. Dulles was running spies out of Switzerland. You know, he made his bones, good or bad, whatever you think of Dulles. And Donovan did what Donovan did, as we pointed out in the Donovan episode. But look at what this guy's doing. I mean, if he had survived the Soviet Union, which he did, you know what I mean, that mission to the Soviet Union, to Minsk, was a highly successful mission. How do we know that? Because in his diary is all the nuts and bolts of how Minsk works, right? So Minsk, he comes back with a KGB bride who we're hip to, that she's a KGB bride. And who do we put on top of her? Hosty from the FBI.
Yeah, I think it's all suspect, especially going to the club in Japan. Will Dorothy Kilgallen be in Ohio? She could be.
She could be. Maybe
resurrected.
Her daughter, Debbie Kilgallen, who's smoking hot. Her daughter.
I don't know.
But I just want to say something. That guy, John Donovan, by the way, who was his supervisor, before he worked at Atsugi, there's a guy who smeared him. He had another job before he got to Atsugi. He was an ex-FBI agent.
Oh, okay. Right on schedule.
Yeah.
Bill Kinsella keeps growing your AUS channel, gents. Great work. Thanks you.
Bill. Thanks, Bill. Thank you. Thank you.
Pasha. Wow, it never occurred to me that Francis Gary Powers may have been a sacrificial lamb for this larger purpose. Gives one pause, does it not?
Yeah, no, it definitely does, because he was completely smeared for not committing suicide. I mean, the amount of attacks that he had to take for not opening up the silver dollar and injecting himself. The silver dollar had the suicide.
Sure. Stop that word, though.
oh yeah. Maybe we're at the end. They don't know. For not offing himself through the silver dollar. He took a lot of heat for that. Let me just put it that way.
Which is interesting. Dustin wants to know. Dustin will be at the main event, by the way. He'll be potentially an MC.
Oh, cool.
What role did Lee Harvey Oswald's interactions with local culture and people in Atsugi, Japan, play in shaping his political ideologies and perspectives on international? I think he was a snitch, Mark. It
looks like snitch. When you say snitch, I don't know. That sounds like a prison term or something. I don't know.
Well, we call anybody undercover in the military a snitch. And
yeah, but he's infiltrating Japanese communists. I don't know if that's a snitch.
But he's doing it in a club where officers are going. So is he watching?
No. He was going into separately on the weekends. He was going into Tokyo to hang out in apartment with Tokyo Japanese communists. I wasn't clear about that. Besides, he picked a girl at that club, but then he has a housekeeping arrangement with her, and the stuff I'm talking about happens in apartments with the Japanese communists. So let me be clear about that. He didn't keep going back to the same nightclub. He met that girl who was a hostess in the Queen Bee, but then had a housekeeping arrangement with her.
Okay. Because I was going to say, it'd be odd. It'd still be odd for him to be in a club that officers frequent. But
they did. They did see him with her there. Absolutely. And that also the Russian, what they called her Eurasian, like a supermodel, like 6 feet tall, a supermodel Russian, half Russian woman, half Japanese. So I don't know about that woman. But he was seen with her repeatedly by lower ranking military people who were completely jealous of him. So yeah, I mean, that was working. That was definitely working for some purpose. For some purpose. Yeah. A snitch, I don't know. I guess that's as good a word as any.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
well,
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But
undercover, however
undercover,
you want to put it.
yeah, I would say undercover.
And especially if he's with a Japanese or with other people who could be seen as communists,
yeah,
are they screwing other officers? How much of a risk is there? You know,
well,
and he'd be part of that.
I'll tell you what happens. He gets guard duty in the Philippines. They had to rotate the guard duty, and one night he's got the M1. He's doing guard duty, and this guy Donovan rushes out, and he hears gunfire in the jungle, and he rushes out, and there's Oswald. Sitting down with his M1, he'd fired off 4 or 5 rounds, he claims, into the jungle. That there were men there that he challenged verbally, and he was weeping and sobbing and having a complete mental breakdown, and people thought he was on acid. And he was shipped out that night back to Japan because of this incident where he fired his M1 into the jungle 4 or 5 times at maybe imaginary men. And then he broke down crying. That's why. That's one of the things where I thought he was on acid. One of the incidents in the trips to the Philippines.
Could be. I mean, dude had such a crazy life.
Crazy.
But speaking of Oswald, we're going to head over with Oswald to locals.
Okay. And well, I'm going to continue this. I have some more information over there on locals I want to talk about. That's too secret to talk about here on YouTube. I don't know how you people get over there, but I think you take the 101, get off at exit 16, and then try to get over there if you can. I mean, we have flooding around the clock here now in California. Now it's just crazy.
Sure. Or you can always click a link in the description.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought you had to get on the highway or something. How you get to locals? How do you get to locals? You practice a lot, right?
Practice.
What's an imperial reflex camera? Somebody's got to tell me about that, because he didn't have the Minox yet when he was in Japan. He uses an imperial reflex camera to take some of those photos.
I don't know. We'll see what they say in locals.
Okay.